You have 48 hours to remove that hedge or we're taking it to the board. Deborah Voss said it standing in my driveway at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday, clipboard in one hand, sunglasses pushed up into her silver bob, engagement ring catching the porch light. She was pointing at a boxwood hedge my grandfather planted the year I was born. She didn't know I'd already called a licensed surveyor. She didn't know the line she was screaming about wasn't hers to defend. She was about to find out exactly how wrong she was. My name is Melissa Cho, and 8 months earlier none of this had started. I just closed on 214 Larkspur Court in Willow Creek Estates, a quiet cul-de-sac neighborhood 40 minutes outside the city, the kind of place with manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, and a homeowners association newsletter that showed up every first Monday of the month. I loved it immediately. The house had been my grandfather's before he passed, a single-story brick rancher with a wraparound porch and a backyard that backed up to a small creek. I'd spent summers there as a kid, running through the same hedgerow that would later become the center of a 6-month war. I remembered the smell of cut grass on those summer mornings, the sound of the porch swing creaking, my grandfather kneeling in the dirt with a trowel, telling me exactly where his land ended and the neighbors began, like it mattered to him more than almost anything else he owned. Willow Creek Estates had 62 homes and one homeowners association board, run for the last 11 years by Deborah Voss. She lived at 220 Larkspur, 6 houses down, in a 2-story colonial with white shutters and a lawn so uniform it looked painted on. Deborah wasn't just the HOA president. She was, by neighborhood reputation, the HOA. She deserved 3 consecutive terms because nobody else wanted the headache, and over a decade she'd built herself a system. Her word was policy, her opinion was the bylaws, and if you disagreed, you got a letter. For the first few months, I didn't know any of that. I was too busy unpacking boxes, meeting neighbors, and falling in love with the garden my grandfather had built. The hedge, a row of boxwoods running along what I believed was my western property line, was the one thing I refused to touch. It was overgrown, sure, but it was his. I trimmed it every other Saturday, coffee in hand, radio playing from the kitchen window. That was my normal, that was supposed to stay my normal. It didn't. The first sign of trouble came on a Thursday in March, 4 months after I moved in. I found a bright yellow notice zip-tied to my mailbox post. Notice of violation, Willow Creek Estates HOA Landscaping Encroachment, Section 4.2. It cited my boxwood hedge as extending 18 inches over the property's western boundary, and gave me 10 days to correct it or face a $150 fine, with an additional $75 for every week after that. I remember standing in my driveway rereading it 3 times because nothing about it made sense. My grandfather had planted that hedge in 1987. It had been there for 37 years. If it was really 18 inches over some line, wouldn't someone have said something before now? I looked down the street at every other hedge, fence, and flower bed lining the cul-de-sac, all of them equally imperfect, none of them zip-tied with a yellow warning. Why mine? Why now? I called the number listed on the notice. Deborah answered on the second ring like she'd been waiting. Mrs. Cho, she said, not a question, I assume you got our notice. I did. Can you tell me who measured the property line? I did, she said. I've lived here 11 years. I know where the pins are. That answer should have been a warning sign right there. A homeowner, not a surveyor, claiming personal authority over legal boundaries. But I was new to the neighborhood and I didn't want to start a fight, so I asked if we could look at the plat map together. The board doesn't need to consult a plat map for something this obvious, she said. Trim the hedge back 18 inches by the 14th or the fine stands. I trimmed it. Not because I agreed, but because $150 felt like a small price to avoid a fight with someone who clearly ran this neighborhood like her personal fiefdom. I cut the hedge back that weekend, apologized to my grandfather's memory under my breath, and thought that would be the end of it. It was. 6 weeks later, a second notice appeared. This one claimed the hedge was still in violation of the setback requirement and now threatened escalation to a $300 fine plus a lien filing if not corrected within 5 business days. 5 business days. For a hedge I had already cut back at her direction. This time I drove straight to Deborah's house. She answered the door in gardening gloves, a pruning shears still in one hand like she'd been interrupted mid-task on her own roses. Deborah, I already trimmed it. You told me 18 inches, I did 18 inches. The board reviewed the photos, she said. It's still encroaching. Encroaching on what exactly? Whose property? She looked at me like the question itself was an insult. The common boundary between your lot and the walking trail easement. It's HOA-maintained land, Mrs. Cho. Your grandfather encroached on it for years and nobody enforced it. I intend to. That word enforced sat wrong with me, not corrected, not addressed. enforced like I was a criminal and she was the law. I asked her point blank if she had a copy of the recorded plat or the surveyor's pins that established where that boundary actually sat. She didn't answer the question. She just told me the fine would be filed with my HOA account by Friday and shut the door. I stood on her porch for a full minute before I walked back home. Something about the way she dodged the plat map question, twice now, kept replaying in my head. If she was so certain about the boundary, why wouldn't she just show me the proof? I didn't know it yet, but that porch conversation was the moment I stopped trying to keep the peace and started looking for the truth. And the truth, once I found it, was going to blow the entire situation wide open. That Friday, true to her word, a $300 charge appeared on my HOA account, along with a formal letter on association letterhead warning that failure to pay within 30 days would result in a lien being filed against my property with the county recorder's office. A lien over a hedge. I sat at my kitchen table that night with the letter, the 2 violation notices, and my grandfather's old file box, the one I'd never gotten around to unpacking. Somewhere in there, I remembered, he'd kept his closing documents from 1987. If anyone had proof of where the property line actually sat, it would be him. It took me 2 hours of digging through yellowed folders before I found it, a manila envelope labeled 214 Larkspur closing docs in his handwriting. Inside was the original deed, a copy of the recorded plat map, and folded separately, protected in a plastic sleeve like he'd known it mattered, a hand-marked sketch showing the boundary pins and a note in pencil. Boxwood Row planted 3 FT inside line per Surveyor Hendricks 6/12/87. My grandfather hadn't just planted that hedge carelessly. He'd had it surveyed before he put a single boxwood in the ground, 3 feet inside his own line, not 18 inches over someone else's. I sat there at nearly midnight holding a 37-year-old pencil note like it was a winning lottery ticket, my hands actually shaking a little, because I finally understood that this had never been about a hedge at all. It was about whether one person's confidence could quietly override 37 years of documented fact, simply because nobody had ever bothered to check. I photographed everything and called the HOA's management company the next morning, the third-party firm that technically oversaw the board's paperwork. I asked them directly, did Deborah Voss or anyone on the board have a current licensed survey establishing the boundary between my lot and the walking trail easement? There was a long pause on the line. Then the property manager, a woman named Priya, said something that changed everything. Ms. Cho, I want to be transparent with you. We don't have a current survey on file for that boundary. The board's enforcement in that area has historically been based on Ms. Voss's personal assessment. Personal assessment. 11 years of enforcement, on a stretch of boundary that had never actually been surveyed by the association. I asked Priya if that was even legally defensible, and she admitted carefully that it wasn't standard practice, and that any lien filed on a disputed boundary without documentation could be challenged. That was the moment I stopped feeling like a victim and started feeling like I had a plan. I called Hendricks Surveying, the same firm my grandfather had used in 1987, still operating, now run by the founder's son, and scheduled a full boundary survey for my property, including the disputed hedge line and the walking trail easement. It would take 3 weeks and cost me $600 out of pocket. I didn't care. If Deborah wanted to file a lien over an 18-inch strip of dirt, she was going to have to do it against documented, professional, legally recognized proof, not her personal opinion of where the yard ended and the trail began. 3 weeks felt like 3 months. Every Saturday, Deborah walked her usual loop past my house, slowing just enough at the hedge to make her disapproval visible, never saying a word, like she was building a case in silence. I said nothing back. I didn't need to. I had a surveyor's van scheduled to show up on a Thursday morning, and whatever those stakes ended up showing, I was going to make sure the entire board saw it before Deborah got the chance to spin it her way. The morning the survey crew arrived, Deborah was standing at the end of her driveway within 10 minutes, watching. She didn't come over. She just watched, arms crossed, as 2 men in orange vests drove metal stakes into the ground along my property line, one of them close enough to the hedge that I could see her jaw tighten from 30 yards away. I didn't know it yet, but the numbers those stakes were about to reveal weren't just going to settle a dispute over a hedge. They were going to expose exactly how much of that walking trail easement Deborah had quietly folded into her own backyard over the past decade, and she had no idea I was about to find out. The survey results came back 9 days later, delivered as a bound report with a stamped, licensed boundary map. I sat at my kitchen table and read it twice before I let myself believe it. The property line ran a full 3 feet, 2 inches beyond where the hedge stood, exactly matching my grandfather's 1987 notes. The hedge wasn't encroaching on anything. It never had been. But that wasn't the part that made me sit back in my chair. The surveyor had also mapped the walking trail easement, the HOA-maintained land Deborah kept citing. According to the recorded plat, that easement ran along the back of 6 properties, including hers. And according to the fresh survey, Deborah's own paver patio, the pergola she'd installed 2 summers ago, and roughly 400 square feet of manicured backyard sat entirely inside that same easement. The exact violation she'd spent 11 years threatening other people over. She'd been quietly committing herself on a larger scale the entire time. I requested to be added to the agenda for the next HOA board meeting. Priya, the property manager, confirmed the slot without hesitation once I explained why. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse on a Wednesday evening, folding chairs, fluorescent lighting, 5 board members at a long table with Deborah seated dead center. I brought 3 things: the bound survey report, my grandfather's 1987 documents, and copies for every board member. Ms. Cho, you're on the agenda for landscaping dispute follow-up, said the board secretary, a quiet man named Arthur who mostly nodded along to whatever Deborah said. I stood, handed out the copies, and kept my voice level. 8 months ago, I received 2 violation notices and a $300 fine for a hedge the board claimed was encroaching on the walking trail easement behind my lot. I asked twice for the surveyed boundary the claim was based on. I was told the board doesn't need one, and later confirmed by the management company that no such survey ever existed. Deborah's expression didn't move, but her hands, resting on the table, went still in a way that told me she already knew what was coming. So I had my own survey completed, I continued, by the same licensed firm my grandfather used when he originally planted that hedge 3 feet inside our actual property line. I'd like the board to review the results. I passed the report down the table. Arthur read it first, his eyebrows going up somewhere around the 2nd page. The board member next to him, a retired accountant named Linda, flipped straight to the survey map and went quiet. According to this, Linda said slowly, your hedge is over 3 feet inside the line. It was never in violation. Correct, I said. I'd also like to point the board toward page 4. Page 4 was the easement overlay, Deborah's patio, pergola, and backyard footprint sitting almost entirely inside the HOA-maintained trail easement she'd cited against me. The room went silent in a way that felt different from before. Somewhere behind me, a folding chair creaked. Nobody reached for their coffee cups. Deborah finally spoke, her voice tighter than I'd ever heard it. This survey is a single data point. It doesn't override 11 years of established enforcement practice. With respect, I said, 11 years of enforcement without a licensed survey isn't established practice. It's one person's opinion applied as if it were law. And based on this map, that opinion happened to exempt her own property from the same standard. Arthur cleared his throat. Deborah, is this accurate? Is your patio inside the easement? Deborah didn't answer right away. When she finally did, it was quiet, clipped, and completely unlike the woman who'd stood in my driveway with a stopwatch running on my 48 hours. The pergola was installed under a prior board's guidance. That's not what I asked, Arthur said. The board voted that same night 4-1, Deborah abstaining, to rescind both violation notices, refund my $300 fine in full, and require any future boundary-related enforcement action to be backed by a current license survey before a notice could be issued. It was written into the meeting minutes as a permanent policy change, not just a one-time exception for me. Deborah's easement violation took longer to resolve. The board gave her 90 days to either remove the pergola and restore the encroached section of trail easement or submit a formal variance request, the same process she denied every other homeowner who'd ever asked for one. She chose the variance route, and the board denied it 6-1 at the following month's meeting. I heard through neighbors that the pergola came down that October, dismantled over a single weekend, no yellow notice zip-tied to her mailbox, no 48-hour deadline. Funny how that works. She didn't run for board president again the following spring. Nobody was surprised. Arthur took over as interim president, and one of his first actions was requiring every future landscaping complaint to include documented measurements before it could even reach a vote. My grandfather's hedge, the one that started this whole thing, is still standing exactly where he planted it in 1987, 3 feet, 2 inches inside the line, exactly where it belongs. I think about that morning in my driveway a lot, the 48-hour ultimatum, the clipboard, the certainty in her voice like she was reciting fact instead of opinion. It would have been easier to just cut the hedge down completely and never look back. A lot of people would have. But there's a difference between avoiding conflict and accepting an injustice just because fighting it feels exhausting. The truth was sitting in a manila envelope in my grandfather's file box the entire time. All I had to do was go looking for it. Some mornings now I still trim that hedge with coffee in hand, radio playing from the kitchen window, and it feels exactly the way it did before any of this started. Except now I know with paper to prove it that it was always mine to keep. If you've ever had someone in a position of small, unearned power try to tell you black is white with enough confidence that you almost believed them, you already know exactly how this story felt from the inside. And if you've ever had the proof sitting closer than you thought, waiting for you to finally pull it out and lay it on the table, you know exactly how good that clubhouse meeting felt too. If this one hit home for you, you know what to do down in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, the next one's already waiting for you.